It is difficult to believe it has now been 17 years since the final all-modelled production of Thomas and Friends. There are adults alive now whose entire childhood has almost happened since then. But the final special, The Great Discovery, holds a special place in the hearts of a lot of Thomas fans. The live-action model era of the show went out with a bang, featuring the narrow gauge engines and the pack members all in one big special production. There were also huge, ambitious set pieces and accidents, as well as a new character foil for Thomas. I'm talking, of course, about the one and only Stanley. Bachmann's announcement that they were adding Stanley to their Thomas and Friends HO model range was met with great fanfare, and the model has long been sought after and coveted. Delayed by a myriad of things, Stanley has now finally arrived in stock.
Welcome, Stanley!
Bachmann Thomas models have been hit or miss over their own 20-year history though, but recently they have been on a hot streak. So let's see whether Stanley's arrival shakes up the Sodor status quo, as he did in The Great Discovery. At £107 for Stanley though, the range is getting onto the more expensive side rather than being accessible to children, so I'm hoping that quality and improvements are reflective in the model given the price. Stanley arrived in the standard Thomas packaging, which I'm not a fan of. It's very toy-like and there's no box to safely store him inside when he's not in use. Still, Bachmann is unlikely to change this given how cheap it is to produce. I've cut him free and Stanley is looking fantastic. His livery is perfectly shaded and not as glossy as we've seen on previous Bachmann Thomas models. While much of the detail is moulded, such as the springs, piping and handrails, the nameplates are embossed rather than being prints or decals. The definition really lifts their look. Before I go on though, the crooked saddle tank can't be overlooked, and detracts a lot from any quality this model may possess. This has left some nasty gaps at the rear and front of the saddle tanks, as well as pipe detailing that doesn't line up. There's also something red that I noticed by the safety valves. I'm not sure if it's a stuck clump of paint, but if so, that doesn't help matters. It must be said though that there are a lot of positives to this model. The separately fitted whistle looks much better than the moulded ones we've seen on the likes of James. The open cabs are also a welcome addition to the range, allowing for drivers and firemen to be installed with ease. I've never liked the earlier models with their blacked out cabs, though with Stanley it is a shame that there's no glazing in any of these windows. He had them in the show, and those rear windows look very jarring when left completely open on this model. Stanley's funnel looks rightfully tall, if ever so slightly too slender compared to his model counterpart. It better matches his CGI render, but the difference at this scale is negligible. It's the face and the eye mechanism that makes or breaks a Bachmann Thomas model, and in this case, thankfully it's the former. Stanley's face moulding is astonishingly well done compared to the likes of Thomas, Percy and James. The only downside is that this should be the flattest part of the model in terms of finish, but it is the glossiest part. It's also based on the CGI face too. I would have preferred the model one, but the ship for these from Bachmann has well and truly sailed, I think. The coupling hook is moulded and much finer than the likes seen on Percy, Thomas, James, etc. And the buffers are wonderfully moulded and painted, with the beam nicely cut to shape. There is a small cutout for the coupling to be mounted at the right height, but thankfully this is far less noticeable than the huge gaps seen on models like Bill, Ben and Toby. The wheels and chassis make use of existing parts used to construct Thomas, though the wheels are a few spokes short of being accurate to the TV show's model. Edwards wheels have the right amount for Thomas and Stanley, but haven't been used in either case. From above, we can really see the crookedness of the tank. The exploded diagram doesn't really explain how to rectify this, but I'll give it a go to see how simple it is. If I can't, this might be a return and exchange situation. Underneath we have a standard looking Bachmann 060 tank engine arrangement, almost identical to Thomas, but this time we get both front and back couplers. On the scales, Stanley comes in at a whopping 162 grams, which is almost double the weight of my modified Bachmann Thomas. He's very nearly twice the engine, but don't let Thomas hear that. The back-to-back wheel gauging comes in at 14.5 to 14.6mm, which is consistent and as it should be. Overall, Stanley really impresses in the tooling, design and finesse, but is let down slightly by a number of quality issues, chiefly the poorly fitted tanks and some paint splatter. Hopefully it's not a case of style over substance when I give him a test run. Let's get him onto the track. Before I went through with testing Stanley, I decided to see whether the saddle tanks could be realigned. I referred to the instructions and began unscrewing the body, but then realised the tanks are a separate piece that just clips on and off. I managed to pop it off and then reattach it flush with the rest of the body, with surprising ease. That rectified a lot of the quality issues I had, including the lopsidedness and gaps. I also noticed the red fleck of paint by safety valves had disappeared, so that must have just been a loose flake rather than paint spatter. I'm glad I was proven wrong there. Time to power Stanley up and see how he runs. That's nice and not bad for a first run. And I've not really turned the controller up much yet. He is slightly coggy in reverse, but that might work itself out. At higher speeds, he doesn't take off too drastically. There is a suave pace to him. The eye mechanism also works as intended to, and is very gradual so his pupils don't flicker from side to side in a mad fashion. Now for the points test. Stanley is fine in forward motion, but stuck a little in reverse. Let's try that again. Same result. A bit more speed seems to lessen it slightly. He had no issues with baseboard joins though. Let's send Stanley round the loop to see how he copes. His first obstacle is the newly installed curved level crossing insert, followed by a curved baseboard join. Besides a slight rock on the latter, he's all good. On Deltic Pass, same rock again, but otherwise all good. And on the second curve join and crossing, there were no issues. So, Stanley seems to be proving himself to be quite a worthy addition to the Bachmann Thomas range. Normally, at this point in my Locomotive reviews, I'd send the engine in question on a timed loop around the layout at 50% speed on my controller, to try and gauge just how well geared it is and what scale speeds it can run at, and see how this compares to their real life counterpart. With Stanley being a fictional engine, there's not really a prototype to compare him to per se, so there's not really much point in doing that. But I'm going to do it anyway, so it's time to hand Stanley over to my train racing driver. Some say that he was conceived in the uranium mines of Sodor, and that when Paxton once approached him looking for some lost puff, he called the police. All we know is, he's called the Grunt. We've not seen the Grunt much this year so far due to delayed Locomotive releases, but he's raring to go and thankful for that open cab, but not for the internally raised floor. And off Stanley goes, briskly at 50% speed now he's running. He's onto the second board and flying down Deltic Pass. The The haunted house doesn't frighten him off as he passes the farm back towards the main road crossing. He clears the last set of points and flies across the line. So, Stanley did the power lap in 17.72 seconds, which is a scale speed of 56.9 miles per hour. That's faster than the Acura scale Deltic, and in the top 5 lap times so far. It's probably a bit nippy for a real-life Hudswell Clark 060, and the Thomas Wiki says that Stanley's top speed is about 70 miles per hour, making that slightly too quick if that is the case. But at the end of the day, he's a fictional engine, so he can be run as seen fit. There's trouble in the yard. Thomas heard a new 060 tank engine was doing racing laps, and could not stand being beaten by the new engine. So, let's see what time Thomas can post on our lap board. The grunt is in there in spirit, even if he couldn't get into Thomas's cab physically. And Thomas is off at 50% speed, but noticeably slower than Stanley. That might be down to his age. I have had this model for a long time. Thomas races-ish out of Deltic Pass towards the 4th board. In his own time, he makes it across the line. And my modified 14-year-old Bachmann Thomas did that lap in 24.87 seconds or 40.5 miles an hour. And lands Thomas just below the Dapple Prairie. That's a whole 7 seconds slower than Stanley. But Thomas also has a canonical top speed, supposedly, of 70 miles per hour, so he is in fact better geared. That puts us in an interesting scenario. Thomas will be fuming that he didn't come out as the fastest engine, but he was actually better suited to the task in hand. Number 1, we know, doesn't always mean fastest. And now onto the couplings test. As a punishment, / to get his own back, Thomas has shunted another very long line of trucks for Stanley to pull. Let's hope I don't need to put protective barriers around all of my buildings.
Stanley chuffed back. My, that's a long train, he puffed. Not for a strong engine like you, tooted Thomas.
It might be a bit cruel, but with only Stanley's hook to grasp the trucks, he doesn't do it. The second attempt also fails. I'll just re-straighten the hook as it's veering sidewards ever so slightly. There we go, we got it that time. So the hooks have a lot of play in them, which doesn't make them the most reliable, but now they're holding at least. And off Stanley goes in reverse with a hefty train. He's running slow and steady now, and the coupling seems to be holding despite the initial struggle. This is a good model of Stanley and a well executed one for the Thomas range, which has come a long way from its iffy-ish beginnings. Bachmann's eyes are squarely on the collectors with this model and other recent releases in the Thomas range. It's becoming more difficult to guess where the range will go next in the future though, both in standard gauge and narrow gauge. Hopefully, wherever it heads, the quality continues to improve. On to my final verdict. Decoration. Stanley looks factory fresh, with appropriate moulded details picked out in the decoration. The nameplates and lining look fantastic, and the red wheels really pop beneath that white base livery. My only gripes would be that the face is far too glossy compared to the very matte faces used in the TV show. The buffer beams are very plasticky and sheen too, but overall I think he looks fantastic. Details and features. While there's less than one would expect from a general model railway release, In the context of the Bachmann Thomas range that has been around for about 2 decades now, Stanley is actually quite good. There's an open cab with open windows, something not seen in the range until recently, and there's a tolerable face and eye mechanism, and the nameplates are moulded and painted and embossed rather than just being prints or decals. The coupling hooks are a lot finer and the buffers are better moulded compared to other models in the range. On the whole, this could have been done a lot more cheaply, so in the Thomas range scheme of things, this is pretty premium. There are no backward steps from recent releases. I'm happy with the details and features, so it gets the point. Quality. This initially looks like it could tank the model with that poorly fitted saddle tank section and the paint spatter, but these things turned out to be non-issues. As far as Thomas models go, this is well tooled, heavy, and all round decent. Once again, Bachmann, in this range at least, is pushing the envelope here, especially compared to the Bachmann Thomas and Percy still in production. I'm happy Stanley's as good as other recent releases in the range and isn't just a bare bones delivery. He nabs the quality point here. Performance. Stanley performed well in all areas. He handled point work and ball joins well, if better in forwards than reverse ever so slightly. He's not the quietest runner, but nothing untoward went wrong when testing him. There were no derailments, he coupled fine once the couplings were set correctly, and had great control and gradual acceleration, if a bit quick overall when above 40% on the controller. All in all, I'm happy with the performance. And finally, onto price. At £107, this is expensive for a Thomas range tank engine. Thomas himself now costs £68 brand new, but that model is inferior in many areas and is really showing its age now compared to what modern model development tools can do. The investment in the moulding, face, details and running of Stanley do shine through, so there is evidence to back up this higher pricing. He's never going to be a top seller like Thomas, Percy or Gordon, and is aimed squarely at the collectors. Also, comparatively, Stanley is a far more affordable option than the likes of Rebecca and Bo, 2 other recent releases. As I'm generally happy with everything overall, I'll give Stanley the price point today. He's earned it. So that's a score of 5 out of 5, making this an essential item for any Thomas fan and collector. The price may seem like a lot to some, but I think it's palatable to the sector of the Thomas fan base this is aimed towards. Yes, I had my gripes with almost each category. The face is too glossy, it wasn't assembled quite perfectly cosmetically, and it can be a little bit fast and noisy. But I was still happy enough with what I received in all these areas, and that's what my judgments are based on. Chasing perfection gets us nowhere, and this model is close enough and good enough to make me happy in this instance. Stanley is well executed, well tooled, and runs well. That's all I need. With Stanley added to my fleet, he can now make an appearance at the Thomas-themed model gala I'm planning for later this year to celebrate 80 years of the Railway series. The collections I have to play with in terms of engines and rolling stock are linked in the description. Check them out, and if you have any suggestions for train formations, please let me know down in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Take care.